Yeah.
I was sitting there, I was looking in the eyes.
All right, looks like we're good to go.
All right, fellas, you guys ready to rock and roll? Feel free to gather around.
Oh, I know.
Just trying to get our ducks in a row, guys. Quiet bunch. How you guys doing today?
Good, very good.
Good. Who's supposed to be here? I love it. There it is. Appreciate that. I'm not forced to be here. Love it. All right, guys. Well, welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you guys here this evening. For all of you that don't know, we all know, I'm Dr. Evan. Great pleasure to have you guys. Tonight we're going to dive deep on longevity of men's health. It's very important to me, probably very important to all of you. Wearing or being in the masculine role, leaving a legacy. I don't know if that resonates or picks up with all of y'all, but being a father of four, growing a family, legacy is really, really, really important to us, and our purpose and our vision and our mission of what we do and why we show up and why we work 60 plus hours and hang out with our kids and do all the things that we do, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, guys. This is our seminar series. So Be Hard to Kill seminar series. We've done about 6 of these on varying topics. If you guys would like to go back and watch the other ones, you're welcome to do so, as they're all recorded. But our first one was on longevity of the cardiovascular system. Remember seeing you there, sir. So great to have you back. Second one was on genetics, epigenetics. Next one was on pediatric neurodevelopment. Next one was on cycles and seasons of women's health. And today, men's health. Cool? July, I'm going to take a break, but then we'll get back to it. But again, ultimately, with legacy, we really just want to help ourselves, help our families to thrive, to be successful from all the different facets of what that means to everyone. So goals tonight, guys, I'd be able to educate you guys on what the biological and epigenetic mechanisms are that are influencing long-term health and well-being. When I say the term epigenetic, what does that translate to in your heads?
Oh, genes are turning on and off.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a very wonderful clinical brain, sir. So does anybody else not or has never heard the concept of epigenetics? Thanks, appreciate that. So back in the day, were you guys ever told that your genetics play 100% or 100% of the reason why diseases show up in your life? Like whatever mom and dad had, I'm going to get, right? Mm-hmm. It's a super common misconception. Currently, what is accepted in literature is that 5% of disease burden in America is genetically related, where 95% of disease burden in America is epigenetically related, which is kind of scary, but also kind of cool, because that means we have control over 95% of the crap that could possibly show up in our life.
So that means the same as environmental.
A+, nice job. So your genetics can change, but they don't really change a lot. What does change is what binds to the genome, what connects to it. So for example, the terminology methylation. Women are a good example of this. Everybody know that women have a gene in them called the BRCA gene. It's a breast cancer or a tumor suppression gene, okay? If that gene gets methylated, a methyl group is it's organic chemistry, but a carbon group gets bonded to something. It turns that gene off, okay? Which then increases the probability of that woman developing breast cancer by 50%. So there are certain things in our body we do not want methylated, and there are certain genes, like oncogenic genes, DNA that is cancer producing, that we do want methylated. Okay, so this is kind of the high level concept, but that's what methylation means, and that's what epigenetics are, what's currently being studied. And guys, how much crap is in our environment that's messing with our chemistry? Say it louder.
A lot.
A lot. So we need to start to arm ourselves with knowledge and tools of understanding, okay, if I use this deodorant, if I wear this product, if I clean with this, if I use this oil to cook my meat in, what impact is it going to have in my life? And then if epigenetics are happening to us and we are in the process of growing a family, raising a family, reproducing, then how does that affect our spermatogenesis, our testosterone levels, in the genetic coding that we pass along to our offspring, right? And so that's actually part of the reason why we're in the state that we're currently in now. How's healthcare looking, guys?
I had my recent checkup and the doctor said I'm in great health.
Love it. How's healthcare in America looking, guys?
Not so good.
Not so good, right? If you look at just population studies, poor-lived studies, 10 years ago, do you know where we ranked in health outcomes compared to other industrialized nations? Top 10?
No.
Top 20? I'm talking 10 years ago. Top 30? Did we rank top 10? We were 38th at that time. As of last year, the Laguna Healthcare Index 2024, do you know where we ranked? We're 69th.
Yeah.
We've dropped like 30 spots in less than 10 years.
That's not good.
That's not good. Things like life expectancy, infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, obesity rate, cancer rates, like all the things that we measure to look at longevity and chronic health statistics, not doing so awesome. So we need to start to understand why. And, show of hands, who wants to live to like 98, 99?
I want to make it to 100 if I'm going to hit that point.
I love it. So some people are like, yeah, some people are like, hell no. It's like, okay, well, why do we have such a distorted perception of what longevity could be? Because there's, 80-year-olds running the Boston Marathon and there's 30-year-olds in a hospital, right? So what was the difference in the trajectory of where they ended up? And ultimately it comes down to our environment and our health, our choices that dictate our health, right? So hopefully you guys feel empowered by this information, but where does health start? It really starts before you even thought about it, okay? The environmental, or what's called transgenerational stress patterns. This is now very well established and studied because we've had really interesting events happen in the world, and we've measured or evaluated the population reproduction rate and like what happens to those populations, like people from the Holocaust. Very interesting outcomes for their genetics. So it's really important that you understand this concept of genetics versus epigenetics. Epigenetics is the heritable changes in the gene expression. So the DNA sequencing is not manipulated, but what binds the DNA sequencing is what is affected. Histone modification is basically proteins are being altered. Okay, but these epigenetic tags can be passed on to offspring, affecting their gene expression. However, you can change your epigenetics by living different lifestyles and making different choices than what your parents did, which is kind of cool, because then you can set up a better legacy for those that come after you. Okay, so health really starts prior to being thought about. Full study on this, Dutch hunger, winter study showed that pregnant women during that famine, so this was around World War II, there was the elite 1%ers, and then there was everybody else. Okay, the elite 1%ers had surplus and everything. And so they were grossly overfed, just excess. When those individuals were evaluated, their offspring had higher incidences of chronic diseases like obesity, heart diseases, and cancers. Whereas the general population that really had severe famine, the expression of their offspring had more malnutrition, osteopenia, like malnourishment type conditions. And that was measured over 2 generations after that period of time. Paternal epigenetics matter too. We kind of get a weird rap in our culture, especially surrounding fertility care. When we talk about fertility care, who do you think the primary driver of that is in most relationships?
The woman.
Yeah, mom, right? And so the mom's doing all this hard labor, all this hard work. They're looking at their biochemistry, they're changing their hormone profile, they're changing their eating, but dads don't really get brought in to that conversation, and that's doing a huge disservice to the fertility conversation. Because outside of humans so I'm also an animal chiropractor, is the mare the prized possession, or is the stallion the prized possession?
But
The
usually
stallion, and that stallion gets bred and bred and bred because of his genetic expression, right? But in humans, for some reason, we place all this emphasis on the lack of mom not being able to be fertile, when really it takes
us
to fertilize.
Yes.
It takes two to tango, right? And what's crazy is right now in America, if you were to go to a fertility clinic and you were to get your sperm analyzed, you only need about 4% normal morphology of your sperm to have a passing sample. Do you want your sperm to be 4% viable, or do you want it to be 100% viable, right? Which is kind of crazy when we talk about this fertility conversation, okay? So paternal epigenetics matter too. So like individuals that start smoking before puberty pass on a higher risk of obesity to their children. Sperm carries epigenetic markers from stress, toxins, diet, and the embryonic development. And the ability for the woman to be able to get pregnant and implant is directly correlative to your health, guys. Actually, the health of the placenta in morning sickness is directly related to the health of the father. So if women have severe morning sickness, it's actually our fault.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interested about this? It is being recorded, I do apologize.
Oh,
Okay.
well,
Alright.
one of my weapons. I deeply apologize.
We have our environmental toxicants that have been measured over periods of times too. So we have hormone disrupting chemicals like BPA. Where does BPA come from, guys? Plastics. Yeah, a lot of plastics. I mean, go to the grocery store, any aisle. How much plastic do you see?
A lot.
Right? Are you guys starting to see the conversation about microplastics too? Influencing brain chemistry, cognition, blood vessels, like this stuff was talked about 20 years ago, but people were getting chased with torches and pitchforks, and now it's like, oh, crap, they were right, and we should have been considering this the whole time. Phthalates typically come from more of our personal care products, like our deodorants, shampoos. So if any of you guys are using like the 3-in-1 body washes, I would highly encourage you to start to move away from those products. And then our dioxins, which is more industrial type runoff, which, go swim in the Cumberland River. There's a lot of industrial runoff.
Is there any specific brands that are not good?
Yes.
Those specific ones?
Like 99% of them. There's actually a really cool website, GSW or GWS. I can't remember, it's GWS or GSW. Also, if anybody, because we're going to talk about a whole lot of stuff, and usually at the end of these, people are like, wow, that was way too much information. I should have been writing things down this whole time. If anybody would like a piece of paper and a clipboard and a pen, let me know. I'll go grab some for you, okay? Or if you want to take your phone out, take notes, you're welcome to do so. But GWS or GSW, I can't remember, but it is an environmental group that basically rates all these products to see what the toxic burden or load is. So I would encourage you to check that out.
What was it? Sorry?
GWS or GSW? I can't remember.
GWS Environmental Contract.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Ken. All right. So all these chemical toxicities influence epigenetic expression linked to infertility, PCOS, endometriosis, neurologic disorders, and cancer's predispositions, as referenced by Skinner. Maternal stress and cortisol programming. Cortisol is what, guys? It's a hormone, yeah?
Stress.
That's a stress hormone. When we're in a constant state of stress, does that mess up our physiology?
Yes.
Yeah, it screws up methylation processes. Okay? So women in super high stress scenarios influence their corticoid receptor gene, which makes their offspring more susceptible to things like diabetes, obesity, anxieties, depressions, impaired stress response, and immune dysregulation. So, what happened, and really cool in animal studies, they took this mama mouse, and every time she drank water, they electrocuted her, and they mapped the stress response in her brain, and then they bred her. And guess how many generations down the line? So after they bred her, They wouldn't electrocute the offspring, but they would expose the offspring to water. And they would see the same stress response mapped in the infant's brain, even though they didn't have the same electricity stimulus. Do you want to guess how many generations down the line that stress response was able to be mapped?
4.
14.
Wow.
Yeah. Kind of crazy, right?
Did they try to switch it off at all? See if they could do that?
I don't know about that. That's a good question. So, but again, it really shows the power and the depth, the choices that we are making now. 14 generations down the line, what we are choosing to do now is going to affect the epigenetic expression of our offspring. So that's why we talk about purpose and legacy. Cool? Kind of crazy, right? And ultimately,
I'm afraid to do anything, really.
well, 95% of disease is epigenetic. So the choices I make now ultimately influence what happens, right? And so the patterns and the things that we model for our children are going to be extremely impactful. Foundational principle of health that I hope you guys all take away from this evening, because this is truly how disease manifests. Well, roughly 95% of disease manifests. So rather than focusing on the disease, we need to start to understand upstream what's happening to us in order to prevent disease from showing up in the first place. So when the brain and the body perceives or comes in contact with a stressor, it doesn't differentiate between portal of stress. It can be a chemical stress, it could be a mental emotional stress, or it can be a physical life-altering stress. Somebody could chase you with a machete, or you could turn on and watch a scary movie, or eat a whole carrot cake. Pretty much the same order of operations occurs within the body, okay? So the stress being applied to the body is ultimately going to influence how the body responds, okay? Now, if I rolled an ankle, that would be pretty sore and painful, correct? So that was a physical stress which damaged tissue, and now my body's going to create an inflammatory response to provide my body with feedback saying, hey, this is what's damaged, and that will start the cellular signaling response, which will help my body start to repair tissue, okay? That's a really good example of small stress, acute inflammation to repair cycle. But what happens if we have chronic stress, chronic inflammation? Something's going to crap out, right? So if I chose to eat, because key lime pie is awesome, if I chose to eat an entire key lime pie every day for 10 years, a lot of repetitive chemical stress, causing a lot of chronic cardiovascular, systemic, digestive, pancreatic inflammation, which will then eventually lead to what disease burdens? Diabetes. Love it. Diabetes, cancer, heart disease, stroke, right? So you can really apply this logic to pretty much any disease process, roughly right now that we're all experiencing. So rather than focusing on the, how many different diseases do we have out there, guys? How many ICD-10 codes are there?
Too many.
Hundreds of thousands. Yeah, right? So rather than focusing on each disease expression, what if we just look upstream of, okay, what do we have control over? What can I start to manipulate in my life in order to change how my body interacts with the environment and how it responds to stress? So that way it gets more resilient at regulating inflammation. Does this make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So there's a few primary drivers that influence this pathway or this response. One being your neurology, because what's your brain control, guys?
Everything.
A+, nice job. Everything in the system. So we need to make sure the brain is perceiving the right information. Now, is the brain a creator of information or a processor of information?
Process.
Nice. So the quality of the data that it receives affects the organization in the response or the outcome or the effect it will derive, okay? Guess where most of the input comes into your brain from your body? What do babies do before they learn to talk? Eat. Walk. What do they learn to do before they walk?
Crawl.
What do they do before they learn to crawl?
Touch things.
Roll over.
Roll over.
So where does the majority of input come for
Sensory movement.
Physical.
joint position and movement, what's called mechano and proprioceptive stimuli? If you look at the neurodevelopmental pyramid, how the brain organizes information, it has to have tactile, mechano, and proprioceptive input to get to higher states of cortical learning and processing. So the nervous system is foundational to this process, and it all starts with joint position and movement, which guess what kind of office you're in? That's joint position and movement, right? Because it drives neurology. Then we have our GI system, gastrointestinal. The second most dense collection of neural receptors in your body is located where?
Gut.
Gut. Okay, second brain. Okay. Endocrine system is where our hormones come from. We're gonna talk a lot tonight about testosterone, but I do hope to provide you with like some counterintuitive information around it because that's not the only hormone we have inside of us, nor is it the only hormone that matters. And then immune responses, right? Because this is how we interact with the environment around us and how we produce inflammatory reactions in response to environmental stressors. So really health comes from inside us, it came from before us, but now is the only time that we have control over. So we gotta look at what's happening internally and what can we do about it. So these are the things that you actually have direct control over at this time. One being your stress response, or how you manage or how you program your body to handle stress. 2 is the detox process, 3 is how you nourish yourself, 4 is movement, and 5 is mental health, okay? What we think about, what we listen to, what we program into our subconscious. Do you guys know that roughly 90% of the decisions we make every day are subconscious? You're not actively involved in it. Who here wakes up on the same side of the bed every day? Who here rolls out of bed the same way every day? Who here makes the first choice of like walking into the bathroom and using the bathroom, turning on the shower, brushing your teeth, like literally same order of operations. Ever drive to work and forget how you got there? You're like, whoa, all subconscious programming, right? Because 90% of the decisions we make every day are really without voluntary interaction.
You just kind of know, like, because you're so used to it.
Yeah, but the crazy part about that is, what if those decisions are serving us well? What if that 90% is actually moving us further away from a state of adaptation and health? And we're not even consciously aware of it. Right? So, sometimes. So that's where we need to start to think about what we're watching and what we're listening to and program these things into our life and be intentional around it. So, let's talk about the legacy we leave behind. Do you guys know that men have a cycle? Not the kind that you're thinking about. But we have a 24-hour hormonal cycle. There's highs and lows, and there's different things that we can do at different times of day that honor our physiology, that help us with weight loss, weight gain, muscle mass, cognition, hormonal profiles, okay? Women have a 28 to 31 day cycle, and we talked about that last month on Cycles and Seasons of Women's Health. If you guys want to learn more about that, feel free to go back and watch. But we have a 24-hour hormonal cycle, okay? Same order of operations pretty much every 24 hours. So it's all controlled by something called your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the part of your brain, interacts with your eyeballs, and interacts with light, okay? So one of the first things we should be doing every day when we get up is what? Go outside, stand barefoot in the grass, soak up some sun gazing, okay? Literally just like let that stuff just hit your eyeballs. Has anybody, this is totally off topic, but kind of funny. Does anybody start to see the perianal sun gazing movement happening? What? You know what I'm talking about? Hilarious. I'm being dead serious. I saw this board meeting.
You're kidding.
No, I swear to God. Yeah, just
Really?
ask them. Yeah, 100%. Has some really cool health benefits to it. That's hilarious. If you can find this video, it's so funny. So these two dudes out in California, and they are like SoCal to the core. They're at like this community board meeting, and they're like petitioning the local government to provide a safe space for these individuals to do this in public, because we got kicked out of the park, and I will have my and like so steroids. I'm going to have my colleague here demonstrate the accurate posture so you guys can understand what it's so funny. And they're being dead serious. So if you guys can find this video, it's worth it. It's pretty good. Okay? But there's some detailed benefit to it.
Exception to the phrase where the sun don't shine.
Yes, sir. But ultimately, suprachiasmatic nucleus coming in through our eyeballs, got to interact with sunlight first thing in the morning because it sets that circadian rhythm. Okay? Has anybody ever read the book Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker? The rhythms in which you start your day is going to influence the hormonal cycle in which we are ending our day, because we are on a 24-hour programmed cycle. If we do not start our day adequately, we will not be able to end our day adequately, getting to deep states of rest, releasing more growth hormone, testosterone, and going through cellular repair processes. Cool. So also, we have chrononutrition to think about as well. What do we eat at what time of day in order to influence this natural rhythm of our body? So here's an ideal way to think about this process. So here's kind of what's happening to you. Between the 5 to 8 a.m. cycle, cortisol levels are going up. Why? You're starting to wake up. Nice job. Usually cortisol and testosterone are inversely related to each other. So your cortisol is actually high there, but it's going to start to come down, and testosterone is going to start to go up between that 5 to 8 a.m. hour. Because gentlemen, we all typically wake up with something in the morning, and that's why. Okay? Key effects: wakefulness, alertness, fat burning, peak libido, muscle building potential. What to do with this time of day? Ideally between 5 and 8 a.m. we should be getting into fitness, getting exposed to sunlight. I would encourage you to think about breaking your fast somewhere in this cycle, and we'll talk about what to eat at that point in time, but really strength training and sunlight, okay? Between the 9 to 11 a.m. cycle, that's when dopamine and insulin sensitivity are the highest, meaning it's a insulin sensitivity, not insulin resistance. We're more sensitive to insulin release at that time. So that's the best time for focus, motivation, best time for productivity, deep work states, and tackle high stakes or high stress scenarios. 12 to 2, cortisol levels are coming down. We have more stabilized insulin. That's where our body focuses a little bit more on digestion and repair. Most of us usually start to feel a little bit more sluggish and fatigued between that 2 to 3 p.m. hour window, correct? That is because of this downregulation of cortisol, but also your liver, if it's having a hard time processing sugar, can be a reason why you feel super, super fatigued between 2 to 3 p.m. So you may actually need to do a little bit more liver support starting your day, and a really good way to do that is organic dandelion root tea and green tea. Green tea has a lot of polyphenols in it, which help you, and then organic dandelion root tea is a really good liver cleanser, okay? So something you may want to consider doing.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, what, like during that 3 to 5, or 2, I'd say maybe like 2 to 4 for me.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite, physical strength and coordination is not as peak, it's like dipping. And then at about 6 to 8, it like spikes like a rock.
We might be eating the wrong things at the wrong time of day to facilitate that process. Or do you start your day with caffeine?
I have started back.
Okay. So caffeine also affects and alters this relationship because caffeine induces aldosterone adrenals to ramp up, fire up, and that messes with this as well.
I don't know if you've read about that. Isn't like growth hormone and IGF-1, isn't that supposed to be like inversely correlated with insulin? Because there's like a whole section of people like talk about like, oh, timing your meals post-workout because they're trying to maximize the growth hormone spike during that fasting period.
They aren't directly inversely related.
Yeah.
They are in opposition to each other, but there is overlap between one and the other.
Yeah.
Good question. So as we go through this, guys, as we get closer to 9, 11 p.m., melatonin goes up, cortisol goes down. Your body naturally starts to secrete melatonin in reference to sunlight. So melatonin, also because most of us are grossly deficient in vitamin D and sunlight, and we're constantly getting blasted with blue light, our melatonin synthesis is pretty low for the majority of us, and melatonin has significant anti-cancer properties and associations. So really cool functional med doc up in Kentucky. He's he helps people with cancer. If you get the okay.
Don't use the C word.
Yes, correct. He helps people with cancer. But a really important part of this protocol is supplementing your age in milligrams of melatonin a day for the purpose of cancer reduction. Yeah, but ideally all of us, probably 10, 20 milligrams would not be a bad idea. A good formulator who makes clean products is called Pure Encapsulations. They make pretty clean supplementation. Thoughts?
I've also heard it's really good for respiratory distress as well. When COVID was going around, a lot of people were supplementing with melatonin.
Oh, cool.
I think it has a lot of good effects.
I don't know. I'd have to look at like the affinity of the receptors.
I get groggy if I take anything more than 10. I just can't wake up.
I would say it's probably dependent upon each individual's.
I usually take like 3 milligrams of melatonin before I go to bed if I really can't sleep. Like if I'm just like naturally tired and I can go to sleep without it, I do. But like some nights when I feel like I know I've got to go to bed, like let's say I got to go early for something tomorrow, like I'll take like 3 grams of melatonin. Some nights it does still take me a minute to fall asleep. I do eventually, and usually I'm good to wake up by the next morning unless I'm. So just careful how much blue light you're getting your teeth.
Yeah, that is definitely a factor. I'll give you that.
So
I have had, and I have also witnessed situations where either myself or someone I know took too much melatonin and got the opposite effect
Oh, interesting.
to where you could not fall asleep, anything, it made you hyperactive.
I would say
That
it's
happened
probably,
once, it happened once, we were on vacation and Aria, she was really little at the time.
When was
We
this?
gave her this, we went to Florida, I think you were 13 or something.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So what happened was, she was a little hyperactive and we gave her what we thought was, like 1 milligram, you know, she was little. But what we ended up giving her was like a 5 milligram pill and she was like climbing the walls all night.
I wonder if there was any other chemical interactions occurring between medication, supplementation, melatonin, and also everybody's brain chemistry is a little bit different. So we're talking
Yeah.
generalities, right?
Yeah, it's happened to me, so maybe, I don't know, maybe it's hereditary that both myself and my daughter might have. But I've taken too much melatonin also and gotten like, I just felt hyper. Like, almost like I had too much caffeine, it was just weird.
I'd have to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah.
How to optimize these cycles, so like our wake cycle, our strength training cycle, our cortisol cycles. So this is ideally what we should be doing around these periods of time. So again, 7 to 9 a.m., 3 to 5 p.m. is when we should be engaging in strength training. Fasting windows between 7 p.m. and 11 a.m. Deep work between 9 and 11 a.m. is when we're going to be most productive. Again, sleep windows kind of match up with our fasting windows ideally. And then peak performance first thing in the morning. According to JAMA, testosterone levels are 35% higher in men who sleep 7+ hours at night compared to those who sleep less than 5 hours. Really cool. In the circles of like Olympic powerlifters, like the dudes on Men's Health that have like just excessive body mass, they try to sleep like 10-12 hours a night because of the cycles of hormone, growth hormone, testosterone, gonadotropin releasing hormone because it helps body repair and recover tissue. So that's why the T levels are a bit higher, plus probably some of the other fun stuff that they're doing on the side. Chronobiology International, men with late night eating habits have lower morning testosterone and higher cortisol levels. And then Journal of Clinical Endocrinology, natural light exposure and wake timing are directly tied to your testosterone levels and mood regulation. So your stress response in your body, guys, it's called your HPA axis, hypothalamus to pituitary to the adrenals, okay? So your stress response and your precursor to your hormone formulation starts where? Brain. Nice. What kind of office are you guys in? Chiropractic office. What do? We fix spines and brains. So if you want your spine and brain to work better, you want your stress response to work better, we actually need a minimum of 20-degree cervical curvature. And this is very well established in the literature now. So if we have altered stress responses or we've just been super duper stressed for a really, really, really long time, typically testosterone and cortisol are inversely related to each other. So the higher cortisol goes up, the more we suppress gonadotropin releasing hormone, which comes from your pituitary. And the pituitary then tells your testicles to release testosterone. So if that feedback mechanism does not occur, we don't generate testosterone. Okay, so you have to have your hypothalamus tell your pituitary to release a stimulating hormone that makes your testicles do what they're supposed to do, which is why juicers who don't do this well and they inject a bunch of testosterone in their body, what happens to their testicles? Because there is a surplus of said hormones, so the body no longer needs to create it anymore. So really effective people that do this really well, they not only inject testosterone, but they inject growth hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and all the other one. It's really like this. The endocrine system is not independent; it's interdependent. What happens upstream is going to affect downstream, and vice versa. If there's a surplus of one, it's going to shut off the stimulation of the other. Does this make sense to you guys? Kind of like everything in moderation, right? That general adage. With high stress response, as testosterone goes down, we can see an increase in estrogen function. Now, estrogen is actually a vital hormone that all men need. We don't create estrogen, but testosterone gets converted into estrogen through a certain biomechanical process, which we'll talk about here in a second. But men with too low estrogen actually have loss of bone density, more fractures, and other health problems. Okay?
So, but if estrogen goes too high, then we start to have a lot more fat gain, visceral fat, and increased aromatase activity, which is the enzyme that does convert testosterone into estrogen. So this enzyme gets released more when we're super duper stressed.
Those adverse impacts to, also occur to women, right? If they have less bone density.
Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Theirs is just in a different relationship than ours. So with that stress response, high cortisol state, if you guys are super stressed, how do you sleep?
Terrible.
Yeah, not super great. If you're super stressed, typically reproductive function kind of, it's not super present of mind. It's not on the forefront of our mind, correct? We talked about melatonin production and fertility, and then also with this high stress response, we're going to end up with various fertility challenges because if you do have HPA axis dysregulation, if you're just constantly driven into this high stress state, we're going to have a lot more what's called oxidative stress, which means inflammation and stress down at the cellular level. Have you guys ever heard of something called antioxidants? Things that you get from like blueberries and raspberries. Yeah, cool. So this is a part of chemistry. If you are oxidatively stressed, your cells are stressed. They are the anatomic structure of so atoms create molecules, molecules create X, Y, and Z, and it goes up the chain. So at an anatomic level, things are unbalanced and unstable, and things unravel and denature, and things break down faster than they build. Okay. With that stress response, high stress state obviously messes with our mood, but also messes with cognition. The higher stressed you are, the faster the cognitive decline. It also increases cardiovascular risk, elevated blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, and elevated glucose. And then here's the research backing it. Sir.
I got a question. This may be way broader than the scope of this presentation, but I wonder if you had the insight on it. Like if you, like a woman that gets Cushing's disease, which is, you have a problem, you have crazy high cortisol, why do they tend to develop facial hair? Because that would, you think that would be like a symptom of high testosterone, but that's a situation where you actually have produce way too much cortisol. So I didn't know what interaction that would have with testosterone.
It just suppresses estrogen and progesterone so low.
Oh, so estrogen is also suppressed.
Yeah, testosterone is the dominant, which is why they develop more melanin features. Cool. So with that HPA axis, you guys feel like you're burnt, like you're just done, you're cooked. These are the ways that you can actually evaluate this. So these are not traditional blood chemistry tests that you will get done by your primary care physician. It's not a normal part of like your CBC CMPs. These are tests that you have to ask for. And sometimes your primary physician will not perform these for you. So you have to go seek a functional healthcare provider to take a deeper dive and deeper look into your health and your well-being. So if we're having some of these systemic stress-related type issues, these are the actual tests that you need to get done. Specifically, Dutch test is incredibly powerful to look at your general hormone profile across the board and see what's going on inside you. Again, this is not a normal part of blood chemistry. Your insurance does not pay for these tests, but these are the tests that actually help you to get to the root of where these issues are coming from. Cool? All right. So how do we balance out the stress response? It's kind of the same 5 primary practices we talk about all the time, guys. And the really cool part about disease and health is disease can get so in the weeds and so complicated. But if you go super high upstream, it's really a pretty simple fix. And it's more just about discipline and balance in life. So sleep, got to prioritize that sleep window, 10 p.m., 6 a.m., got to get those 8 hours. Everybody familiar with the classifications of plants called adaptogens? If you're not, they're pretty amazing. God put all these cool plants in the world, they're called adaptogens. Things like ashwagandha, holy basil, boswellia, rhodiola, there's different types. But if you are super high anxiety, it regulates you to baseline. If your system's exhausted and depressed, it regulates you to baseline. It just brings things back to what's called homeostasis, or relative normal processes. So I know me personally, I respond really, really well to ashwagandha. Shameless plug, chiropractic care, dramatically impactful for your stress response. Most individuals, as they go through care and they start getting adjusted, report usually by their first or third reevaluation, like, dude, I just don't feel as jacked up as I used to feel. Take care of this wonderful gentleman by the name of Blake. First responder, trains paramilitary people, like super high performance guy. Back in the days, like, dude, bedtime would be a physical. Like, it would be like, God, just get so good. He's talking to me, like, yelling match. And he's like, dude, after starting to get adjusted and fixing some of these things, I'm so much more chill. It's great. Your HPA Cold exposure, like Wim Hof. Anybody familiar with Wim Hof? Yep, Iceman, Wim Hof breathing techniques. So if anybody's familiar with box breathing, 4 in through the nose, hold for 4, 4 out through the mouth, hold for 4. This is how snipers breathe in order to downregulate their blood pressure and stimulate their vagus nerve, which helps to regulate cortisol and stress. But severe, or not severe, because too much is not a good thing either. But cold exposure, going out, running around in the snow, doing ice baths, or very last thing that you do in the shower, go from like your normal comfy setting and shift it all the way over to cold and get blasted in cold water for like 30 seconds, dramatically influences your HPA axis, your alertness, and downregulates your cortisol. Strength training increases testosterone and improves the HPA axis. The really cool part about your body is the more stress you voluntarily engage in, the greater resiliency that you have. It's like trial by fire. So if I load my body with a ton of physical force by choice, and I overcome that, my stress response goes up. It's kind of cool. It's the same thing with pain. When you weightlift and you put a lot of stress into your tissues, the level at which pain fibers are activated goes up. Their threshold or tolerance to pain is higher, which is kind of cool, right? So that's where individuals that don't do any sort of physical activity typically have higher inflammatory loads and lower pain thresholds. Think of like your fibromyalgia people, okay? So, and then nutritional support. What can we do to help support that stress response? Magnesium, liposomal vitamin C. Please stay away from your ascorbic acids, which is a primary preservative. And then if you're looking at B complexes and B vitamins, they do need to say the word methyl in front of them, because we just talked about epigenetics and methylation, which we're all having a really hard time doing in this environment. So if we can get methylated Bs, it will help support this process. Most men blame low testosterone and burnout and belly fat on low libido, but in reality, it's actually their HPA axis that's fried, because everything starts up here and trickles down. Sir?
What kind of magnesium would you recommend?
Glycinate.
What's that?
Magnesium glycinate
Glycinate?
or magnesium succinate. Just stay away from magnesium citrate.
Okay. I'm taking magnesium 3-in-8. I'm 3-in-8.
Oh, 3-in-8, that's where I've taken it. It's great for like sleeping.
Yeah.
It's great for that.
Cool. Thank you.
As I understand it, that's the form that will cross the blood-brain barrier.
Cool. What's the second? Magnesium what?
3-in-8.
3?
Yeah, L-threonate. That's an amino acid. I
Okay,
guess
so that's
that's
like L-theanine?
yeah, that's the I guess it is kind of like it.
Is it possible to over supplement with
Yes.
magnesium? If so, does that mean you're getting enough from your diet?
Yes, and or it's an absorption issue, or you're not getting enough of it into the cell and your body's excreting it. I mean, there's a way that you can measure intra versus extracellular levels through some of this functional testing.
Because I've taken several of those different types to figure out which one works for me, and none of them work for me.
Interesting.
But I don't have a problem when I don't take supplement with it. But I hear that it's good. It's a one that you should definitely supplement with. But whenever I take it, it makes me feel.
A less expensive way for you to find that out is you could go to like an AK provider and they can muscle test you and figure out which formulation your body interacts with. Okay. All right. So with men, especially aging men, we focus heavily on testosterone and low T, but there's also a misconception here that estrogen is completely bad for men. And it is and it isn't at the same time. Too much and not enough, just like everything else in life, is a detriment to the body. While excess estrogen can cause problems like gynecomastia and libido, estrogen is actually essential for men's health and emotional health as well. Too little estrogen due to extreme fat loss, so people that carry too little body fat will have excessive enzyme inhibitors that then suppress that even further, and then they typically suffer from that, like chronic stress, contributing to brain fog, memory decline, joint pain, low libido, so forth and so on. So where does estrogen come from? From men, testosterone actually gets converted into estradiol, which is a version of estrogen. If their estrogen acts on the estrogen receptors in brain, bone, and blood tissues, it helps to actually increase bone density in men. It protects the arterial walls, increases the elasticity of the blood vessel, and increases nitric oxide production. Nobel Prize winning study on this in the late 1990s by 3 medical doctors shows that if you can increase your nitric oxide levels, you can pretty much reverse arterial and atherosclerosis, or hardening and plaquing of arteries. So that's a really Eat beets, nice job, yeah. Crack some beets, yes. But there's also some really good formulations of nitric oxide nowadays. One that I personally use is called VasoPro Plus. It's really beneficial. It's usually the first thing I put in my body in the morning. You do have to be a physician to get it, so if you want it, let me know. There's a consumer grade version one though that's pretty good. It's formulated by Dr. Brian something in Texas. And it's called NO2U. So nitric oxide, number 2U. So if you want to check that out, feel free. Also, estradiol modulates synaptic plasticity, meaning the formation of connections in our brain, and it actually does help with erectile function, libido, and sperm maturation. So, research shows us that men with too low testosterone and too low estrogen lose both muscle mass and sexual function. So we want to be careful about where these things are in balance, and this is where those Dutch tests come into play, because we can figure out if you're too low, optimal, or too high. And that's not a traditional part of your blood chemistry, so I would encourage you to ask for this. Okay? What can disrupt estrogen balance in men? Excess aromatase, which comes from high visceral fat. Leptin, which is a hormone released from your fat cells, has a really significant impact on your estrogen. Endocrine disruptors, like we talked about, are BPA phthalates and soy protein isolates. This is why I have a bit of a bugaboo with general veganism, at least veganism done from a certain way, because most men, long-term vegans, just trash their hormones over a 5-10 year period of time. It takes a while for them to build back up. And then low cholesterol diets and statin uses. Guys, every single cell in your body needs cholesterol, uses cholesterol. Do you think God would make you make something that every cell needs that's going to kill you? No, right? Cholesterol is such a very, very, very important molecule. Cholesterol is the precursor. You have to have cholesterol to make any hormone. Cholesterol is also the precursor to the formulation of something called myelin. And myelin is the fatty sheet that surrounds and insulates your neural tissue. So when we don't have cholesterol, or we're suppressing cholesterol, or even because there's differences in HDLs and LDLs. Most people know that. But LDLs are broken down further. So most people don't get a complex LDL profile where they just said, hey, you have too much bad cholesterol. That's not really true. If you have LDL apoprotein B or apoprotein E, then you are highly more susceptible to cardiovascular disease. But this is an advanced lipid profile that you have to ask for. It's not a part of general cardiovascular blood works and screenings. So you have to really push to get the appropriate diagnostics done versus oh, your LDLs are too high. Did you know that there's this landmark study evaluating 300,000 people published back in 2015 showing that there is no increase of any kind of mortality across all measures of disease if your cholesterol is between 150 and 250. There is no increase in any form of mortality across all measures of disease if your cholesterol is between 150 and 250. Yet, gentlemen,
They say 200 is too high.
that's not what the research says.
Yeah.
And it's not what the research says looking at LDL profiles.
Yeah, I used to work at Quest Diagnostics, so I get free lab testing. So I did all kind of experiments on myself. I tried getting it really low, and if you eat just even slightly too early before the test, one time I accidentally took a sip of my wife's coffee, which had creamer in it, and I said, oh shoot, I'm supposed to get blood work done, so I put it down. That one little sip of our whole thing of the heavy cream and stuff, it completely screwed up my cholesterol. But I was gonna say is I did keto for several months and tested my blood through it, and my cholesterol went from 200 to 225. It wasn't even. It's they're telling me that I'm really only eating fat and protein. I mean, tons of cholesterol, and it hardly. My ratio's improved, and it hardly raised it. So,
and there's really cool arguments to be made around this. If you guys like reading. Carnivore Code by Dr. Paul Saldino is a good book to read. Paleocardiologist, another which I personally adhere a little bit more to, by Dr. Wolfson, another really good thing to read to understand the longevity of the cardiovascular system and where more advanced testing needs to be done versus, hey, your cholesterol looks bad. Most people are getting overprescribed this medication from crappy diagnosis. And then when we do get statin medications prescribed to us, do we ever get it taken off? No. And then what's the most common yet severe side effect of utilization of this medication. Early onset on Alzheimer's, dementia, and cognitive decline. Okay? So, we just need to be a little bit more
That's
conscious.
interesting. There was a book by Dr. Peter Attia, Outlive, and that was one of his recommendations for cardiovascular health is taking statins as early as you can.
I would do the exact opposite,
Yeah.
run far, far away.
I saw what somebody was debating him on, that was YouTube, I don't know who was hosting it, but there was somebody debating him on that. I saw
At
about
that point, yeah. My doctor agrees with you, my primary physician.
That's a common practice, somebody with heart, had a heart attack or had heart problems, first thing they're gonna inject up with the statins.
Statin, blood pressure,
Yeah.
and anticoagulants. So after we get through stress management and understanding a little bit more about our hormones, next thing that we can kind of get into is detox. And it's becoming much more, I used to give a whole lot of weight to detoxification protocols, but man, just the longer I'm in practice, and the more sick people and sick children I'm seeing that respond really well to detox type protocols, the more merit I think that has. The crazy part about this, because we have so many high phytoestrogens or estrogenic type chemicals in the world that mimic estrogen, or what are called phytoestrogens or xenoestrogens, it's really messing up male and female physiology, because if females are too high estrogen dominant, like they can conceive but they can't carry, usually past 12 weeks. Okay? So this all comes from our plastics, pesticides, and sperm count. Okay? So crisis sperm count has dropped by over 50% since 1973. That's in total volume. Yet a viable sperm sample again is less than 4% normal morphology, meaning the sperm looks the way that it's supposed to and is going to perform the way that we want it to, which is crazy, because if we're all about legacy for future generations, we're very rapidly approaching the ability to not do this anymore. Okay? And I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you guys want to go, but there was a video circulating of a TED Talk of Bill Gates about 20 years ago talking about how we need to diminish population, and you know what I'm talking about. So, and he's the single largest land owner and farm owner in the world, or in our country. He owns the majority of all farming. So global sperm crisis has declined by over 1% year over year for the last 50 years. So it's not so much about genetics as it is about the epigenetic expression. So what are estrogenic chemicals? These are xenoestrogens coming from foreign substances, but again, this is coming from our plastics or hygiene products. Atrazine is a new one that we're talking about, and actually the one who brought it to public attention was our wonderful RFK.
You say that sarcastically?
Nope, I'm super pumped about that, because he's the one that's been providing a little bit more light about this. Atrazine used on our products in animal studies have turned male frogs into female frogs. It completely feminizes male function. And this is what's primarily sprayed on a lot of our pesticides. Same thing with like Appeal, that clear coating that they're putting on things now, even organic produce, in order to make the produce last for longer windows of time for shelf stability. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so we need to be really conscious of, as consumers, of what we're putting into our body, because ultimately it's really jacked.
Is that something that can get rinsed off, or is that once it's on, it's on?
I don't know that yet.
Okay.
They're talking about it. They're trying to figure it out. I saw something about a baking soda vinegar kind of something, and it peel off like this waxy thing, but I don't know. I haven't read enough about it.
It's in the water, that's the problem.
Yeah.
It runs off into the water.
Atrazine is actually found in our water supply.
Yeah.
And it feminizes them, so.
Well, if you're gonna spray the crops with it,
It's gonna industrial runoff, right? It's gonna happen. So again, these are long-standing complications of utilizing and lobbying products for commercial usage that we don't really understand the effect of over a long window of time, because a lot of this stuff hasn't been studied over 10, 20, 30 years. It's the same thing with the COVID vaccine, right? We're seeing all sorts of interesting ramifications of that process because there was no long-term studies on this new technology that was being utilized, and now we see there's some pretty severe long-term complications from utilizing this technology. So how do we eliminate or things that we need to be consciously aware of? Please be aware of BPA and BPS. If anybody tries to hand you a receipt from a store, you need to wad it up and throw it away in under 10 seconds because it will have a dramatic impact on cancer rates, and you can research this. I'm being serious about that.
What, the receipt machine?
Receipt paper is highly, highly toxic.
They were able to like test, they were able to detect it in people's saliva, like after they were holding a receipt. I don't know how long.
For
they were
greater
doing
than
that.
10 seconds.
What's in receipt paper that makes it so toxic?
BPS.
Wow.
So another thing to think about is kind of changing all of our plastic products to glass, stainless steel, ceramic, cast iron. Please be careful about your non-stick products as well, because that is just dramatically riddled with microplastics, and they're talking like one scratch equates to like 10 million elevated into the bloodstream or something. Deodorants, the best deodorant I found, because I used to be like back in the day, what was it, Old Spice stuff. That, you know, how like stain your t-shirts blue and things like that. It's not good. One of the best deodorants I found out there, it's a little bit more expensive, but it lasts for like 6 months, and it definitely makes people less stinky. I've ever, like, it's the best deodorant I've ever come in contact with. It's called Primally Pure. It's an activated charcoal deodorant. It's very, very clean. And what is inside our armpit here? What kind of tissue is inside the armpit?
Armpit hair?
Yes, but underneath the skin, we have a lot of lymphatic tissue, lymph, which is really, really impactful to our detoxification.
I use the Old Spice deodorant currently. Are you saying like I should switch away from that?
1000% yes.
Okay.
Yes. There's actually a really cool book called Dress to Kill, talking about how women in other countries that don't wear underwires and bras, their incidence of breast cancer is like dang near nil. Whereas in Western societies, because of the compression that it applies and how it affects the movement of lymph through that tissue, dramatically influences breast cancer rates. Yeah, this doctor actually presented it to the UN, and they're like, we're not going to do anything with it. But there's actually a really cool book on this. Shampoos, deodorants, sunscreens. This is a really important one for you guys to understand. Sunscreens, the primary chemical substrate and how sunscreen is built is based upon what's called a benzene ring, which is it's a very stable carbon-based structure. But when benzene interacts with chlorine, guess what it causes?
Cancer?
Cancer. So if we are using oxybenzone type sunscreens and then we're going swimming in a pool, you are vastly increasing the probability of melanomas. So we need to be switching more to like zinc oxide based or mineral based sunscreens when we're swimming in pools specifically.
So like what kind of brands have that, do you know?
Think Baby's one. I don't know.
All the common brands that you find.
I found a good one at Trader Joe's.
I can see it.
recently. It's a solid zinc oxide spray.
Oh, an aerosol.
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
actually really good.
No, be careful with aerosols.
I use those clean apps kind of stuff where I scan.
Yeah.
And it'll give you a rating on it. That one rated like 99 out of 100.
Nice.
So
You could.
Yeah.
You could.
you got
Sweet.
Yeah.
I know we used Think Baby in the past. I think there's one called Think Up that we use. It's like a white bottle with blue and yellow. I can see it in my head, but those are the ones that we typically use as a family. Okay. Try to buy organic when you can, and try to avoid glyphosate and atrazine. There's a massive class action lawsuit against what's that?
Bayer bought them, but it was.
Bayer Monsanto.
Monsanto.
They got slapped with the largest fine of its kind because glyphosate, which is the primary chemical ingredient in our favorite weed killer,
Roundup.
causes
Causes all kinds of cancer.
lymphoma. Yes, and they got slapped with a massive
Well,
class
other
action lawsuit,
types of cancers besides just
but
lymphoma.
primarily lymphoma. And then water ideally needs to be filtered, but we're also supposed to get a high mineral content from our water. So if we're stripping everything out of it, we need to put something back into it. So usually getting like a hand harvested organic sea salt and sprinkling a little bit of that in will help you with your mineral intake. There is also various trace minerals that you can look at picking up to put in water. There's some mixed information on how available or bioavailable they are. So I think probably the best thing to do at this time, based upon my knowledge base, is getting that like organic sea salt and sprinkling just a teaspoon of that into 1 serving a day in order to increase your mineral intake. Okay. But how do we support hormone detox? Our cruciferous vegetables are very high in Something indole, diindole, it's a big chemical compound, but basically what it does is it helps the liver and the kidneys filter out a lot of this crap. And sulforaphane and calcium D-glucarate also helps the liver and the kidneys detox the body and helps to restore normal hormonal cycles. Parsley and cilantro as herbs are also extremely impactful at cleaning up the tubules of the kidneys. Very impactful for things like kidney stones and helping to flush out the liver. Dandelion, also incredibly impactful at helping to flush out the liver. Do you know that your muscles and your liver are what store the most amount of sugar in your body? So if we have a lot of sugar or insulin resistances or insulin sensitivities, livers are a really good target for that because that will help the pancreas to do its job better as well. Chlorella and spirulina, which is what's in here, helps detox the liver and binds heavy metals. So if you guys ever do like parasites love eating heavy metals. So if you have a high heavy metal load in the body, that's like a really nice environment for parasites because they have a surplus of food. So ideally, if we can get heavy metals out of the body, it's going to be incredibly impactful. Also, heavy metal detoxes are crazy impactful for our neurodivergent and neurosensory kids. Usually they have a very, very, very high incidence of aluminum or mercury, something as an adjunct that cross the blood-brain barrier and really messing stuff up. So there are West Coast doctors, specifically Dr. Burns, and this is the other guy's name. He's a biomedical doctor. I can't remember his name. He developed something called the neurodevelopmental quadrangle. I can't remember his last name. But they're known for reversing autisms. Okay? Sauna therapy and dry brushing helps the lymphatic system, helps us excrete waste and toxins and gets that stuff out of us. Sweating is a great way to release heavy metals. And then use the bathroom. Use the bathroom, super important for the elimination if you guys are constipated. Yes, sir.
I just want to mention, because you're talking about sulforaphane on there on the cruciferous, that's also supposed to help with the telomeres and activate telomerase to protect the chromosome. So like the whole thing that wraps up your genome protects it.
Capsians. And then they also did a really cool population study on people under long-term chiropractic care, and their telomeres live longer.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, so your DNA, your cells don't denature or turn over as quickly as other individuals. So people under long-term chiropractic care, your cells physically live longer, and it's measured at the DNA level. Super cool. Okay, so how do we eat to honor the cycle? Ideally between 6 and 9 a.m. We should be fasted and then getting really heavy into protein as we move into that 10 to 12 p.m. cycle, protein heavy fats, and leafy greens. As we get closer to that 1 to 3 p.m. cycle, that's when we want to have a little bit higher carbohydrate intake. Usually the carbohydrates that are lowest on the glycemic index are going to be your wild rices and your quinoas. Okay? Quinoa also, from my understanding, it's the only plant that has a complete complex of amino acids. So you'll still get a high protein content from there as well. 4 to 6 p.m. depends on if you work out or not, but that would be an opportunity for you to incorporate a few more carbohydrates into your diet. But then as soon as we start to approach that 9 p.m. time frame, when melatonin starts to go up, we really want to start to cut off intake, okay? So, you guys know what a microbiome is? No. That's okay, it's the makeup of the bacteria that live on and in. We get our bacterium, our first bacterial exposure from who? Nice, coming through the vaginal canal as long as we're born vaginally. For individuals not born vaginally, we know we have much higher incidences of chronic diseases, cancers, obesities, and neurodevelopmental issues because the microbiome or the makeup of the bacterium that live on and in us influence something called psychoneuroimmune modulation, our mental and emotional health and well-being, the development of our brain, and the competence and integrity of our immune system. So the microbiome is a really important process also in the formulation of your hormones. There's a hormone and neurotransmitter called serotonin. Do you guys know what serotonin is? It makes us feel
Good.
happy, good. Do you know where 90% of serotonin is made, guys? Brain or gut? Gut.
I'd say gut, yeah.
By the bacterium that live there. So these bacterium do some really cool things to create precursors to the synthesis and generation of multitudes of these hormones, specifically things like serotonin. So if we really want to have a significant impact on the hormones, we need to look not just at the brain and the hypothalamus, which is the precursor to the stimulation, but to the bacterium there, because the bacterium then send information up the vagus nerve, which then tells the brain, also provides the brain feedback on what to do and what the hypothalamus should be doing. So your gut and your brain, it's kind of like chicken and egg conversation, which one came first? Doesn't matter, they both affect each other, okay? So we gotta be influencing both. So a good way to help ourselves with our microbiome are prebiotics, because the prebiotics is basically the substrate that the bacterium grows on. The probiotics are what feed it, and then it's polyphenols. Sorry about that one, but green tea is a really good source of this. So if you consume, again, green tea and organic dandelion root tea first thing in the morning, this will be very beneficial to your microbiome, but also be very beneficial to the detox of the liver. My kids, for example, like I'll just feed them a spoonful of sauerkraut every day and a handful of pumpkin seeds, and they're cool with it. So very good for the microbiome. Pumpkin seeds very good for parasitic detox, and that's like a part of their breakfast, like every day. Eggs, frozen fruit, sauerkraut, pumpkin seeds. We have this weird perception in America about like breakfast foods. And like it's eggs, oatmeal, cereal, milk, donuts, muffins, pancakes, waffles. We don't have to eat those things for breakfast. You can eat a steak and green beans, right? It's just,
You go to Asia, they eat soup,
yeah,
noodle soup.
that's just nourishment, right? For some reason, we've been crazy preconditioned that like, this is breakfast food and dairy builds bones. It's not. Okay? So if we start to kind of change our social conditioning, we can start to change our choices and start to engage in that a little bit better. Inflammation, like we talked about, that stress inflammation process is a huge driver of this decay and this dysregulation. So great ways to help our body with nutritional or with anti-inflammatory protocols are going to be eating those high omega foods, those polyphenols, those anti-inflammatory processes like turmeric, curcumin, green tea extract, magnesium and zinc, like we already talked about, because those two things influence testosterone production. And then important for y'all to avoid things like seed oils, so cooking with your grapeseed oil, your canola oils, help me out here. Vegetable oils, basically all the things that are used primarily in commercial kitchens. That's why there's a big push now, like if you've seen Steak and Shake, they're like, we're going back to using tallow. And a couple other restaurants are like, hey, we're gonna be using these fats and oils that have a much higher smoke point, heat point.
I use
Avocado oil. Yeah.
I don't know what kind of oil we use at work. I work at Taco Bell, and sometimes I work the fryer there, and they have some kind of oil that we use to like fry food. I don't know if they use it, but it doesn't look very good.
No, and it's super rancid, and when you cook it at high heats, it starts to create
It's very high heat.
Yeah, and it
But
starts,
whenever I touch that thing, it is like shockingly hot.
and if it starts to create smoke, it's creating oxidative stress. It's physically, it's now a detriment to your body. Rather than high in omega-3s, it's going to be much higher in profile in omega-6s and 9s, which produce a whole lot more oxidative stress. Again, this is an organic chemistry thing about where the carbon binds to the chain and the impact that it has in your body.
And I saw something recently, like I said, it might be beyond the scope of this, but they were considering that maybe, because you have like the healthier fats and worse fats, you have trans fats and all, but they were saying that it might actually be the number of carbons in that chain has a greater effect rather than just the class of fat.
Correct. And where that last methyl group binds that carbon chain. So that's what changes the classification from omega-3s to omega-6s to omega-9s. It's just which carbon does it bind to, the third, the sixth, or the ninth. Binds to the third, really cool health benefits. Binds to the ninth, not so awesome health benefits. Majority of our ratios right now are like 16 to 1 from like omega-9s to omega-3s. And they should be like 32 to 1 from like omega-3s to omega-9s based upon the foods that we're consuming. So next big bucket that we can yield benefit from, movement, because movement dramatically influences lean tissue mass, bone density, hormones, metabolic rate, vastly beneficial to our longevity and well-being. Has anyone read Tom Brady's book? The TB12 thing? Super cool insight into training. Because how many quarterbacks are out there at 45 years of age winning a Super Bowl?
Rarely any. He was.
Only one that I'm aware of.
Tom Brady.
And he talks a lot in his book about how he trained his body. And so for the purpose of aging, we should start to train different. We shouldn't be like setting, we shouldn't be trying to train the same way that we did in high school. Okay? Yeah, absolutely, right? So it does not work the same way. And so if we have longevity in mind, Running backs, how long is their career typically?
Not long.
2 to 3
Short
years,
shelf life.
right?
couple years, yeah.
Because they have massive hypertrophy tissue, high type 2 fibers that are great for explosion, but also not long lasting, right? Whereas the more elasticity we have in tissue and the more load it can keep up with, the better longevity of the tissue, which is why Brady kind of shifted from resistance training, you know, classic squat type, load bearing resistance training to more resistant or band type work and functional movement type practices. So I would encourage you guys to kind of check this out, because when we go for like max effort PRs, it's a pretty high stressor to the nervous system. And yes, the more stress we apply to the system, typically the more resilient and adaptive it gets. But there is a tipping point there, okay? Heavy compound lifts are really, really important, but we want them to be also controlled and have normal functional movement with them. So like deadlifting versus like going through a full smooth range of motion is gonna have a different impact on the elasticity of your tissues. So, for example, we want to focus on pliability. Is everybody familiar with something called fascia? It's a relatively new discovery in anatomy. They dissected a full fascial plane out of somebody like 2 years ago for the first time. So it's kind of new. Fascia, have you ever messed around with sausage before and you like see like that thin casing outside that holds all the meat together? So fascia is this web-like connective tissue that connects everything from the top of your head to your toes. That's why sometimes when people have gallbladder issues, they'll feel viscerosomatic referred pain to behind their shoulder blade. Yeah, right. So real world example, and this is how fascia interacts. That's why sometimes when you get adjusted or you go to a massage or something, somebody's working on your calf, you're like, wow, I feel that in my ear. Fascial plates, right? So new discovery in this, there's a cool book on this called Anatomy Trains, if you guys want to read about it, check it out. But fascia has dramatic impacts on the movement of fluid through something called the interstitium. It's the space between cells and tissues. And if that fluid gets congested, then you can't transport new nutrients into the cell, and the cell can't transport waste out of the cell. It's like living in a bog or a static, crappy water environment, right? So the movement of fascia, very, very important, as it covers all connective tissue as well as all organ systems. Ideally, we should be following, again, anti-inflammatory protocols, getting appropriate sleep, hydration for the purpose of training our body for longevity. I really like this video because it shows an example of how functional movement is now starting to be applied in really cool ways. So these are different types of flows that individuals are doing now, going through multi-planar movements, multiple rotations, multiple angulations. For example, like usually as we get older, we start to walk more, right? Like walking is a pastime. Walking is something that we do to keep up exercise and activity. But our joints don't just do flexion extension, right? They do translations, they do rotations. And so if we're not challenging the body to move in multi-planar type motions, we're going to lose the elasticity of that tissue. We're going to have more connective tissue diseases. So great example of that. What does science say about training for longevity? Zone 2 cardio, like we just talked about, walking is zone 1. A little bit faster than walking is zone 2. So very, very, very light aerobic activity. But when we do that, we want to move in multi-planes. So if you are doing that, walk laterally, walk diagonally, walk backwards, walk in different planes that challenge your brain and challenge the rotations of those joints. Sir?
Then following that logic, like an activity something like Tai Chi.
Yeah.
Ideal.
Yeah, actually.
It's the way, talk about all the different types of movements and doing it purposefully and all that. So it just made me think of that.
Journal of Exercise Physiology actually shows us that Tai Chi outperforms yoga when it comes to regulation of your HPA axis and your stress response. So it's also really beneficial to your neurology. Yes.
Something I kind of got as well as what you were saying is as you get to be a certain age, you should change your movement styles and stuff. Currently, while I'm young, I do when I do track and stuff, we have a stretching routine that we do, and we do our typical workouts. So you're saying I need to change that stuff when I'm older and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And for the purpose of performance now, if you're doing a lot of static stretching prior to running, you're diminishing your performance. Prior to exercise, we should be priming tissue. So whatever activities you're doing, like calisthenics, whatever activity you're going to do at maximum, you should do at minimum. So if you're going to go run for 10 miles, because I know you're a distance guy, you want to do small, angulation type movements to prime the tissue for activity. If we stretch the tissue out prior to activity, we're fatiguing the stretch receptors. The stretch receptors are necessary to tell your brain when they're tired, and so that we don't damage the tissue further. So if those stretch receptors are pre-fatigued, then you're going to be more susceptible to injury and poor human performance. If the stretch receptors are primed, like, if I wanted to punt a football, then I would spend 3 minutes prior to the activity just gently swinging my leg and doing the rotational type core
So
movements
we
to
do
get my
do
body
like
ready.
calf stretches and like leg swings after we're like done with stretching.
You would want to do that before stretching, so it's out of order. So you'd want to do active movement, do the activity, and then do static stretching afterwards.
So that's why it's actually better to stretch after a workout.
Yes.
Because here's what we do,
Than
like
before.
our typical thing is like we do a warm-up mile, like static stretching and then like leg swings and stuff, and then we finish the run is typically what we do.
I would probably do static
So
stretching.
they'll be kind of like, okay, because you're doing the same motion, like, okay, if you're gonna bench press, you might like bench the bar or something. You're doing that motion and then
Prime the tissue 3-4 times, get some blood flow, get some elasticity, and then
Alright.
stress the
I'm gonna-
tissue.
I'm gonna talk to my coach about that, see if we can.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
let's
this
do
is
that.
We're gonna see what happens, but like, hey, I'm gonna.
well-researched in exercise physiology. Now, load on tissue does keep the tissue around and healthy, so we don't want to get rid of resistance training altogether. One of the coolest things that we can do for longevity is what's called a farmer's carry. You hold basically the equivalent of your body weight, half of it in this hand, half of this in this hand, and you walk. And if you can do that for roughly 60 minutes, the correlation to this activity and longevity is dramatic. And if you can't do this, the probability that you need assistance and other issues in your 6th, 7th, and 8th decade of life is dramatically higher. Longevity is directly correlated not so much to our shoulder mass as it is to our glute quadricep mass and the bone density of our femurs and our pelvis. Do not skip leg day, okay? So we do still want to stress and load tissue, and we still want to do compound movements, we just want to do it potentially a little differently, okay? But a farmer's carry is a good way to get that done.
Dr.
Sir,
You said 60 minutes?
sorry, 60 seconds.
Okay, I was gonna say, I could not do that for 60 minutes.
I could not do that for 60 minutes either, sir.
That'd be a tough order.
That would be a tough task, okay? Women want to aim for roughly 75% of their body weight for 60 seconds. So I would challenge you guys, go pick up a couple, 120-pound dumbbells and walk around and see how long you can last, okay? Because that will influence your grip strength. Grip strength, asymmetric grip strength is directly correlated to early mortality as well. So, but really, biggest driver I see nowadays is not so much not knowing that we need to exercise or not knowing that we need to nourish ourselves appropriately. But what I see, and this is true of my life, is what goes on between our ears. What sort of social engagement do we have? What sort of intimacy, connection? Things can get lonely at the top, right? As the head of the house, sometimes it depends on your family structure, but as a leader and as head of the household and wearing a lot of responsibility, it feels really lonely and isolating sometimes. I don't know if you guys feel that. I feel that. I feel that often, and that's one of probably my biggest struggles. So oxytocin and its prevalence and how well we interact with it and how well we generate it is massively correlative to men's longevity. And usually it's heavily leveraged for women, but super important for men. And unfortunately, this time men are dying younger, not just from heart disease and cancer, but from disconnection, depression, burnout, and lack of purpose. Suicide rates are 3.5 times higher in men than women. Men are less likely to seek help for anxieties and depressions because we are masculine and strong and there's a social stigma around it. And loneliness increases all causes of mortality by 26 to 45%. Have you guys ever noticed that in a really good quality relationship, if the older woman dies or the older man dies, the partner typically dies within like 30 days? It's very common. Dying of a broken heart. We're not meant to be isolated. And we learned that a lot through COVID, right? Like how many mental and emotional and suicidal things went way through the roof and we were all socially isolated. We're not meant to be that way.
Well, it's not good for us at all.
It's not. We are meant to be in community with each other. Men specifically, we need community, okay? So we need to get plugged in and hang out with each other sometimes. Oxytocin is underrated for the longevity aspect. Function of oxytocin helps with emotional resilience, neuroprotection, testosterone levels, social connection, and inflammatory control. When oxytocin is elevated, we have reduced inflammatory cytokines, meaning the amount of inflammation in your bloodstream is physically lower. Okay. So we need to increase our oxytocin. purpose is biochemical, and people with high oxytocin, lower C-reactive protein, which is the main way that you look at your blood chemistry. That's on your CMP profile. That's a normal thing that people look at. Elevated C-reactive protein, high inflammatory states. Elevated oxytocin, better sleep, better cardiovascular health, improved testosterone levels, and improved motivation.
I heard recently that hugging people for 4 seconds or more will help increase your oxytocin in about
30. And children, 10 hugs a day, especially your son, your male children, which is physical touch is more impactful in developing male neurology than it is.
So 30 seconds and then at least 10 times.
10 times a day, 10 hugs for your kid. And sometimes I get home and I think I may have seen you for 5 minutes and maybe kissed you on the head once. I'm like, man, gotta get my stuff together, right? Get your priorities right. Sir?
Do you think touch is becoming a primary need versus secondary, versus food, water, oxygen, things of that nature?
Interesting thought.
I'm getting a lot of that debate with one student.
Yeah, in your psychology classes?
It's interesting, I'm beginning to wonder that.
It's
I don't believe it, I don't believe it.
I don't know, I think if you distill it down, it kind of comes down to that nature-nurture conversation as well. But, you know, physical touch is a primary driver of hormonal responses and social engagement. So super important, also really important for your vagal tone. Your vagus nerve is the primary communicator between brain and gut. So how do we increase oxytocin production? Having intimacy, male-to-male intimacy, communication, social engagement. When I say intimacy, it doesn't always mean sex, right? It just means connection, right? Human connection. We need to be connecting with people, hugging people, loving on people. Okay, that's where the cool part of being a chiropractor is. I get to love on people, give hugs, lay hands on people. I'm constantly in physical contact with individuals, which is really, really fun. Acts of service, altruism, drives oxytocin and dopamine responses in the brain. Prayer and meditation. Really cool book on this. Has anybody ever read anything by Bruce Lipton? He's an MD, DC, PhD. He's a doctor. He used to teach at Stanford Medical. Really cool book called The Biology of Belief. If you have not read this book, I encourage you to because it is really cool and impactful. But it basically talks about how at a cellular and anatomic level, as humans, we work and perform better when we have this relationship active, when we have an active prayer life, when we are actively meditating, when we're actually being conscious to the world around us. Okay? Super cool book on that. And if you want to take that even further, really cool doc by the name of Joe Dispenza, who published multiple books. One's called You Are the Placebo, the Nocebo Effect, talking about how, you know, just your conscious awareness and your intention that you put towards something creates dramatic impact. He did the largest study of its kind, 5,500 in real time MRIs, where he has a network of people praying or meditating and consciously putting effort towards healing another individual that they're not in anywhere close proximity to. And in real time, they're seeing neuroplastic changes in this person's brain and the brain rewiring and their body like actively healing itself. I know it all kind of jumps into the realm of applied and theoretical physics, but ultimately we are all frequency-based individuals. Everything is vibrating at different resonant waves and resonant frequencies. So there is some truth to this. I would encourage you guys to check that study out because it's the first of its kind. It's really, really cool. Breathwork and cold exposure helps to reset that HPA axis and promotes that neurochemical release of oxytocin and feel-good hormones. And then just having purpose, understanding why you're here, what you're doing, and what you're on mission for. Most individuals don't set goals for themselves, and if they do, they typically fall off. So having a purpose, having something that we get up in the morning for and drive towards ultimately influences our happiness and success. So being in the service of others is truly usually where we find our own purpose and happiness in life. So how do I find purpose? This is a really good question and something I think probably all of us struggle with in varying stages of life. Because let's say I had a specific purpose, I was the primary breadwinner for my family, and now I'm retired. What's my identity now, right? Or let's say I was a multi-sport athlete and I blew a knee. What's my identity now, right? We lose, or we find and lose purpose in different seasons and stages of life. So kind of refocusing around
the why behind we're doing what we're doing helps drive that intention, and ultimately the why is going to dictate the action and the outcome. So if I don't have a purpose for eating healthy, why would I ever engage in that process when it's much easier to go to McDonald's? Correct? So these are really, really good books, ones that have been super influential to me. Also, if you have children at home, specifically a son, Wild at Heart is a really cool book to read. I encourage you to check that out. Atomic Habits builds a really cool tactical framework of how to start to change your choices, because it just builds it into the framework of your life and talks at a very surface level about the neurophysiology of making a decision. Super cool book here. Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. One I don't have up here, which I would put probably at number 9, is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Wilkins. Yeah, super cool book. I would encourage you to check that one out. And then Purpose Driven Life is also a very, very good one. But I would encourage you guys, if you're struggling on finding purpose or your why, or you feel a little lost, start to reprogram your conscious and your subconscious, so that way you start to understand and look at the world in a different way. And then last question I want to leave you guys with is, what kind of legacy do you want to leave for yourselves, for your family? Now that you understand the epigenetic influences of a lot of these choices that we're making, whether we're eating out of plastic containers or applying a different type of deodorant or working out in a certain way, it's ultimately influencing our longevity and our genetic and epigenetic expressions. And if you're still in a reproductive phase, it becomes even more important. And as patriarchs of various families, instilling this knowledge in individuals prior to conception would be the most impactful thing that we could do, right? The more that we can feed into our children and our grandchildren and help them start to discern and make better choices for themselves, versus being like, hey, it's grandpa and grandkid time, let's give them 27 donuts. Yeah, it's fun, but what impact is that actually having? Correct?
Not a good one.
Yeah, so I challenge you to think about the legacy you want to leave, and we want to model the behavior that we want our loved ones to follow. So primary things that we need to focus on really boils down to 5. Number 1, get biased, get adjusted. Improve your HPA axis, help your brain process information.
That is not biased at all. That is 100% facts.
It is true. Number 2, pray, meditate. Your relationship with your creator and your relationship with your world around it and how you view things is ultimately going to influence your stress response and your relationships. Number 3, gotta nourish ourselves like your life depends on it, because of epigenetic methylation and histomodification issues and the toxic load that our bodies are incurring. So we gotta be really conscious consumers here. Strength training, we wanna drive the majority of that in our glutes and our quadriceps, so we increase our bone density and lean tissue mass. And then find purpose, so that way you're always working towards or finding the next thing that provides you with joy or something you're looking forward to. Cool? Our family, as always, looks forward to partnering with yours to get to the root cause of your health concerns. Thank you for your time and attention this evening. I hope this was beneficial to you. And feel free to hang out with us in August for our next workshop, which I don't know when it's going to be on yet, but I'll let you know.
Very good.
Cool. Do you have any insight? I know it's like I said, it's probably not out of the scope of it. Do you have any insight on like DHT? Because they say like with testosterone, you get the dihydrotestosterone, so you get that conversion. That's what they say makes you go bald and whatnot.